I knew this was coming the moment I made the switch. I understand how this whole game works, but I still got baited in. Baited in by the promise of greener pastures outside the windows. But at what cost? I mean, this is a new device. Today's video is sponsored by Micro Center and their February Build Upgrade Save event, where amongst a bunch of other things you can get some thick savings on a core system bundle. In fact, I've even glazed these 7800X 3D bundles in a previous video because they're just really good value. Also, if you live in Austin, Texas, you're getting your Micro Center, so sign up for a free 128GB flash drive when the store opens. And finally, if you want to stay up to date with the latest tech news, check out Micro Center News. Click on the links for everything down below. Now first off, let me tell you why I bought a Mac Studio. Now in my previous video where I came out as an Apple user, I complained about my 2023 MacBook Pro running into some slight performance issues while editing videos. More specifically, I ran into some RAM limitations because when I bought that MacBook Pro, I just refused to be held hostage by Apple's ridiculous RAM pricing, which these days is still ridiculous despite everything that's happening at the moment. But anyway, because I didn't pay $300 extra for 16 gigs of RAM, I was stuck with 16 gigs that the laptop came with in the base model, which kind of doesn't allow you to have 800 Firefox tabs open while you're editing a video, unfortunately. And because I can't upgrade my RAM in that MacBook Pro, well, I had to buy another Apple device. So I ended up buying this Mac Studio over a MacBook Pro for a couple of reasons. The first is I already have a laptop that, if I don't go too ham on the Firefox tabs, handles my editing load pretty well. So I already have a portable device that I can take with me while I'm traveling and making videos and stuff. And because the Mac Studio doesn't come with all of the bits to make it a laptop, it costs an order of magnitude less money for the same spec. Like, I could buy a year's worth of packet ramen for that difference. And that isn't even the full extent of the price difference, because there's also an I/O issue. For a MacBook Pro, you have to buy a dock to integrate it into like a desktop setup, which isn't in itself that big an issue. The main problem is I really want 10 gigabit networking connecting my main editing system to my NAS so that I don't have to wait 10 years for my video project to copy around. And a dock with 10 gigabit networking in it costs another like 800 Canadian dollars. What is this thing made of mithril? Why does it cost so much? Whereas the Mac Studio just comes with 10 gigabit networking as standard, which honestly was a big part of the reason I got it over another MacBook Pro. And then finally, the base configuration of the Mac Studio comes with more RAM than the base configuration of a MacBook Pro. And considering that the 16 gigs in my MacBook Pro just barely struggles to handle my workload, I felt like the 36 gigs that comes in the Studio as standard would be more than enough for my workflow. However, I didn't end up getting the base version of the Mac Studio because I found a way to get a bunch of the upgrades for the same price as just buying the base model. So I ended up going with a 2025 Mac Studio that has an M4 Max chip in it, the version with 40 GPU cores, 64 gigs of RAM, and well, just the base 512 gigs of storage, because editing on an external drive works really well in the Apple ecosystem, so I'm not going to pay them for additional storage. Also, there is a workaround where you can actually upgrade the storage in the Mac Studio, so in the future, if I wanted to, I could go down that route, although it is pretty complicated. And I got that system for about 3,200 Canadian dollars, which is more than the base Mac Studio cost. But on Apple's website, just upgrading your M4 Max chip already puts you at 3,450 Canadian dollars. And then if you jump up from 48 gigs of RAM to 64, it takes you to almost 3,800 Canadian dollars. And the way that I save that 600 Canadian dollars, which I'm going to take as not paying for the RAM upgrade, is by buying refurbed. Longtime viewers of the channel will know that I am a huge sucker for refurbished anything because, well, if it's factory refurbed, it means that you're basically getting a new product, but for like way less money. And that is very much the case with Apple. This Mac Studio is a certified Apple refurb, so you buy it off of Apple's website. It still ships really quickly, and you save a whole bunch of money going that route. This is actually the second refurbished product I've bought from Apple, and every time I interact with one, I just don't understand why anybody buys a brand new Apple device, because the condition of these things is insane. In the previous video where I bought a refurbished Apple Mini, people in the comment section said that Apple actually replaces the aluminium cover when they refurb it, and that's why they basically just seem new. And I believe that because there is no sign of wear on this device at all. Now look, it still cost a huge amount of money, but I think the spec that I got makes more sense for the amount that I paid because honestly, it is a really impressive device. We'll look at the performance in a second. Now, something to bear in mind with this process is that the stock does fluctuate quite a lot, so you have to wait for a spec that you want to show up. However, they add new ones almost every day, so chances are you don't have to wait that long. For my configuration, because I wanted an upgraded one with base storage, which is quite a rare configuration, I did have to wait a bit longer for one of those to show up, but you'll be able to figure it out pretty quickly just keeping an eye on the website. But with that, before I talk about my experience living with this Mac Studio for the last month and a half, doing most of my work on it, let's try and do some gaming on it, because I really want to see how it handles gaming with its 40 whole GPU cores. Okay, we gotta power up our Mac Studio with a quick reach around. Now you actually get Cyberpunk in the Apple App Store. I've bought this game so many times at this point, but it's a good way for us to benchmark the system. I'm gonna initially test it at 1440p because that's a very common resolution at this point. And graphics-wise, it says for this Mac. Oh, that's interesting. What do we get here? High, on. I mean, it's pretty aggressive. Oh, why is it so heavy feeling? I mean, we're getting pretty much exactly 60 frames per second, but it feels so bad. It almost feels like I'm playing using a server in Mongolia. I don't know what's going on here. Okay, we have VSync on. Ah, wow. Turning VSync off gave us an extra 3 frames per second. Well, that 3 frames per second has vanished now, but we're also still getting the input lag. It's maybe slightly better. No, it isn't. It's like when it's got this floaty feeling to it. It feels really weird. It feels like there's an acceleration and deceleration curve on the movement. I don't know how clearly it shows up on camera, but it did also feel worse with the screen capture on. I then turned on Apple's Metal FX upscaler with balanced settings to see what that would look and feel like. It's jumped our frame rate up to almost 100. I mean, there's less input latency now, but this is so weird. So I feel like when I complain about input latency on a MacBook, I thought a big part of it was due to the display situation, but apparently that's the case even with an OLED. Now I will say, Metal FX doesn't look that terrible. I mean, we've lost some detail, especially in the distance, but I feel like for balanced, I've seen much worse. I then tried Resident Evil Village with relatively aggressive settings at 1440p, and it ran way better. Oh yeah, well it does run the crap out of Resident Evil Village. I mean, we are still just in the house where our baby's about to be taken, but that's a lot of frame rate. Oh, I have the baby in my hands. Oh my god. Okay, never mind, I need to put it away. Okay, well, yeah, I mean, it does run the crap out of Resident Evil. So that's good, you know, if you do want to play some Resident Evil Village and you happen to own a Mac Studio, you're gonna have a great experience. Like, this is way more performance than what I was getting from the MacBook. And luckily, with Resident Evil, we don't have any of the input latency issue. Like, this game feels like it's running at 160 frames per second. I then ran some Cinebench R23, which the little Mac Studio absolutely dumpstered. These are some serious scores. And apparently these Mac Studios are LLM monsters, and all that with basically no heat or noise. This is very impressive hardware, even if it isn't a gaming powerhouse. So what has my 2 months of doing all my work on the Mac Studio been like? Well, it's been pretty good. Like, hardware-wise, there's not a huge amount to complain about. It is a powerful, silent system. RAM usage-wise, I'm usually hovering around 36 to 40-ish gigs. I am glad that I ended up going with the 60 gig system because I do step over the 36 gig threshold pretty easily, especially now that I've switched to DaVinci Resolve, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the video. So yeah, I mean, hardware-wise, the main niggles with the Mac Studio is that its foot doesn't have enough grip for it to not slide around on a desk, which I find really annoying. And Apple's ports kind of suck, which I wasn't expecting. The Thunderbolt ports are fine, they click and hold in place nicely, but the HDMI and Square USB ports are like nightmare first date scenario. Like, I mean, this is a very expensive device. I feel like that wiggle shouldn't be there in the ports. And it's not just that the Mac can't feel you putting it in. I've actually lost connectivity before, and this isn't just a Mac Studio problem, it's the same with the HDMI port on the MacBook Pro, which I didn't buy refurbished, so it's not a refurb problem either. And then software-wise, it's fine. I'm less excited about macOS than I am about the actual Mac Studio. Like, the operating system mostly does what I want it to, but there are parts of it that I don't like. I don't like, for example, the file system. It's annoying to me that you have to set the sorting with every new folder that you make, and why is the default sorting just splattering the files in the folder with no rhyme or reason? That's kind of weird to me. Stability-wise, it also seems to be a little bit mood-based in the way that Windows is. I think generally its mood is better than the average Windows system, but things do crash occasionally, especially since I've moved to DaVinci Resolve. Like, most of the time, it's fine, but yesterday, I had like 3 crashes in a row with DaVinci Resolve, and I ended up having to restart the system, and then it was just fine, like nothing happened. So yeah, I'd say macOS is aight. I'm not aroused by it, but I wouldn't say it's as actively radicalizing as Windows is, so, you know, it's got that going for it. And then finally, I just want to do a quick brag about being Adobe free. My contract ran out in January, and since then, I've been using DaVinci Resolve, which, like I said, I've had more stability issues in macOS than I did with Premiere Pro, which is kind of weird. But the reason that I went with DaVinci over something like Final Cut Pro is I didn't want to be stuck in Apple's ecosystem. But yeah, DaVinci Resolve is also fine. I think ergonomically I still prefer Premiere Pro, but it blows my mind that DaVinci Resolve is free. Like, I'm using the free software as a trial before I buy the full version, and I think, if anything, even the free version is a more powerful video editor than Premiere Pro is, because a lot of the kind of like visual effects stuff in Premiere Pro, they move over into After Effects, and that stuff is just in DaVinci Resolve if you're a pleb like me that doesn't want to learn something as advanced as After Effects. So yeah, this is a wild free piece of software. I am going to buy it later on because I do want to support their company. I do use it to make my living on, so I feel like it's just right for me to buy it. But still, like, it's great that you can trial and just use this very powerful piece of software. Having said that, I do have a couple of niggles with it. I don't love the fact that to do color grading and stuff, you have to go into different workspaces. I just want like a Lumetri color tab that I can have in my main editing bit. Another annoying thing is that you can't change the frame rate of your timeline after you've dropped clips in it. So there has been a situation where I got like halfway through an edit and realized that my timeline was in 24 frames per second and not the 30 that I wanted to be in. And dealing with that issue was way more difficult than it needed to be. Like, why is that a thing? I don't understand. The most annoying thing about it of all for me is the magnet feature, which is very useful. You need that for your clips to like click together and not accidentally kind of overwrite each other or whatever. Like, you use that a lot. The problem is that it also applies to your timeline scrubbing for some reason. Why can't you separate those two out? It's super annoying. Like, why would you ever want your timeline scrubbing to magnet to the beginning and ends of clips? It doesn't make any sense to me. And because you can't separate them out, you're constantly having to toggle that feature on and off between when you're doing some editing and then timeline scrubbing. It is super irritating to me. I don't know who thought this was a good idea, but yeah, there you go. That's a thing that you have to deal with. Again, it's not the end of the world, but it does mean that I have to do quite a lot of toggling, which I'm not a fan of. So yeah, I'd say with that, what we've learned from today's video is that you should always buy refurbished Apple products. I will say that there is clearly demand for it. Like, sometimes there's very little stock, so it is a more involved process than just buying a new thing, but you end up saving basically the amount that your RAM upgrades cost, which makes me feel a lot better about buying this thing, quite frankly. Which brings me to the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this video, and until the next video, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.